Welcome to episode 11 of season 2 of The Thriving Lawyer with Kathleen Brenner and Carla Ferraz. We are so thrilled today to have two guests who are very eminent and have a lot of expertise that we think is going to be super relevant for lawyers. So first of all here, I'd like to introduce Professor Christian van Nieuwerburgh, who is an academic consultant and executive coach. And as Professor of Coaching and Positive Psychology, he leads the Centre for Positive Health Sciences at RCSI University of Medicine and Health Sciences in Ireland. And in recognition of his contributions to the fields of positive psychology and coaching, he's Principal Fellow of the Centre of Wellbeing Science in my hometown at the Melbourne Graduate School of Education of the University of Melbourne, Australia, and Honorary Collective Ed Fellow of the Carnegie School of Education at Leeds Beckett University, UK. So welcome. We're thrilled to have you. We also have David Love, and David Love is a leadership coach with over 20 years of experience working with senior and middle managers in the UK public services, for example, the NHS. He's also an experienced coach supervisor, a mentor, and an educator. And before becoming independent in 2013, he was Principal Fellow at the Office for Public Management, designing and leading projects with public service organisations, focusing on organisational and leadership development. Previous roles included teaching and senior leadership positions in the post-16 education sector. And reflective practice is the heart of David's work. With his clients, and regular planned reflective practice is a central feature of a commitment to his own lifelong learning. So, look, David, Christian, welcome. We are absolutely thrilled to have both of you. There's so much relevance and experience that will be of interest. So let's just get into it. And we were thinking, when Carla and I were thinking, look, how would we open that? And I think just, the best place is to give you both of an opportunity to just tell us a little bit more about yourselves, your work, and why you thought it was important to write this book, Better Reflective Practice, which I have been reading. And I have to say, I'm in the midst of assignments for my Masters of Science in Coaching Psychology, and I'm doing the subjects that involve quite a bit of reflective practice. And so I have to say it's been an incredibly useful tool as I go about thinking about how I reflect. And I come to this very interested from like the coaching level, but also as a practicing lawyer. But I'll hand it over to you. Perhaps Christian or David, whoever you'd like to start.
Thank you so much, Kathleen and Carla. First of all, we're so delighted to be here on your show. Episode 11, Series 2. How amazing. Thank you for having done so many of these. And one thing I just want to say at the start is two things. One is David was my teacher, the person who taught me how to become a coach. So of course, similar to yours, Kathleen, and how lucky am I to get to work with David. We've written a couple of books together, in fact, around coaching. So that was such a treat. And the other thing, I just want to start by saying how much I appreciate the listeners of this podcast. They do such valuable work. And so I think what we're going to talk about today, both reflective practice and well-being, they're such important topics. So I'm just grateful to be here. David?
Yes, ditto. Really, really, really pleased to be here. And I think this is a really important initiative, the podcast series, but also the well-being initiative that's been brought in Victoria, which chimes really well with what we're going to be talking about today, because one of the central ideas in our framework is exactly that we need to think about well-being, both of ourselves and of our clients and the colleagues that we work with. You asked about why we wanted to write the book. I mean, we've both been involved in education for coaches, and I think we were both quite surprised within that experience that clever, experienced people who basically knew what they're doing and doing a good job with coaching still found it quite hard to engage in reflective practice. and found it even harder to write that up for assignment credentialing purposes. So one of the reasons we wanted to write this book was to get a practical framework out there that people could use that had some theoretical basis, but was very practical and enabled people to work through a process that would help them to do effective reflective practice and to do it better. And I hope we've achieved that. That's one of the things that we set out to do. Another reason I was involved in this book, as Christian mentioned, we'd written a book before about coaching together, and it was such a great experience. We had, apart from the serious aspect of it, we had such a laugh. I wanted to do it again, so we did it with this book as well.
Yeah, no,
Thank
thank
you.
you. Thank you for the introduction and the motivation to write the book. Not only like sharing the reflective practices, but also having fun along the way. So beautiful. Working with friends. This is what we do here as well, me and Kathleen. So reflective practice is such a powerful concept, and it's really often misunderstood, like you're sharing within the coaching world, but even like overlooked in professional settings as well. As we know, like reflective practice has this potential to be such a transformative tool. I know has been in my life, since I started doing like a more structured one, it deepens learning and, it even like build resilience in a way, because we get better at overcoming our own thoughts, when we get to realize that they are there. But, yet many professionals either don't make time for it or maybe not even realize that it is a tool. It's, something that you can really approach intentionally, can sharpen your thinking, and it really enhance, like, how you overcome challenges. So I just thought we could start with the basics. How do we define reflective practice? It can go either way, David or Christian.
Well, Carla, thank you for that. Positioning of it. It is so crucial. And so I'll start by very simply going over what is reflective practice. And then maybe, David, you could explain how effective reflective practice might be different.
More complicated, you mean?
Yeah, you do the more complicated stuff. The reflective practice, for me, it's a pretty simple concept. And that is, the words give us a lot of clues here. There's the taking time to think and reflect about our practice. So that's an important part of it. But really, reflective practice refers to reflecting on our thinking and then making a change as a result of that thinking. So that's all that reflective practice is. But Carla, you mentioned something so important: the difference between structured reflective practice, which is what is advocated, and there's many people who have written models around reflective practice, Gibbs, for example, or Kolb. And so this idea of thinking about something and then making a change, if we do it in a structured way, we think that adds a lot of value to professionals. If we do it in an unstructured way, which we probably all do, because, if we've had a bad interaction with someone, we do spend time thinking about it. So we're reflecting on it, but sometimes we're not doing it in a structured way so that we can take the positive learning from that and learn about how to deal with it in the future. So for me, that's what reflective practice is. It's thinking about kind of your professional experiences, interactions, thinking about if you're achieving what you want through those interactions, and then if you're not, thinking about what do I need to learn so that those interactions or experiences can be better.
Yeah, and of course I agree with all of that. I think it's not always about thinking. It's not always about sitting and doing the kind of Rodin sculpture thing. Yes, that's a key part of it. But we talked to quite a few people when we were writing the book about how they go about reflective practice, and a lot of them found it quite hard to explain how they did it because it was such a natural thing. They did it so well. But it often involved ways of switching off the thinking And one of the things that I've got really involved in recent years, bringing it in from my private life, is using art in coaching. And art is getting clients to create an image of some form, however simple or however complex, switches off the thinking brain and switches on the emotions. People talk more freely about how they feel about things when they're creating and talking about an image. So yes, the thinking is absolutely in there, and needs to be a structure around that. And it's also about switching that off sometimes. And sometimes, if I'm writing something with Christian, and I'm getting stuck with what I want to write down, I might go for a walk, and I'm not necessarily thinking about the issue anymore, but something will start to pop into my brain that begins to clarify what I was with, without having kind of deliberately focused on it. So you can be deliberate and focus on things in a very clear, intentional way, and you can allow stuff to happen, create the space for things to just emerge. And that's one of the beauties, I think, of our framework, is that we've provided a structure in the book, and we think it's a really powerful and practical one. But we encourage people to find their own way of using it and to be flexible with it. It's not meant as a rigid mechanical script that you have to work through. Once you've got it under your belt as a process, you can use it way more flexibly and miss bits out, put other bits in, be very creative about how you go about it.
I just mirror back with some reflections, and what comes to mind for me is that what I'm hearing there is these two really different and powerful elements. One is that process of the thinking and the reflection, the active cognition kind of process that you have, which when you described it, what came to mind was, I remember in our studies coming across sort of Anthony Grant's arguments around the different kinds of reflection, the active self-reflection, and not being rumination, the risk of rumination if it wasn't that kind of productive, that this process really enables you. But also what you're talking about there is the freedom to be creative and express yourself, or disconnect from the thinking in the moment, in order to really look after your well-being and actually get the more creative kind of reflection. Is that right?
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
Yeah.
And we're also talking about, as other writers have talked about, this is not a new idea, obviously, but we can reflect on things that have happened. So looking backwards, we can reflect forwards to think about things that might happen or are going to happen, and we need to get ready for them. And we can also, particularly as coaches, we can also reflect in the moment. And that's in coaching, we talk about internal supervisor. That's a kind of aspect of your internal supervisor. So all professionals, including lawyers, need really to be able to be doing some of that. It's quite difficult to do, obviously, all the time. But if you can practice reflective practice, looking backwards and looking forwards, you become more adept at being able to do it in the moment. And being able to do it in the moment as a coach, as a lawyer, I think is really powerful, because you're kind of monitoring what you're doing and reviewing what you're doing and changing it as you go. As I say, it's quite difficult to do that. It's not simple, but you can get to that position.
Yeah. So you've started to already introduce the next question that I had, but perhaps we can go into a bit more detail, which is around, with that definition of reflective practice in mind, why it does matter for professionals. And, if we were talking about professionals generally, but thinking from my own experience with, 17, 18 years as a practicing lawyer, I know how easy it is to get incredibly busy with the flow of, constant matters and demands, and, just doesn't seem to end sometimes. And that can face a real challenge. And, we mentioned before we press record, David in particular, that lawyer wellbeing systems theory of change that's just been introduced by the Victorian Legal Services Board and Commissioner, where I'm based. Now, what is intriguing about that, I have no connection with that. In fact, I'm a regulated lawyer in that jurisdiction, but I was thrilled to discover this new theory that came out and that was released by the Commissioner, because at its heart, it was all about addressing lawyer wellbeing on multiple levels, and reflective practice was placed at the very heart of that. Now, I've never heard that in all my years of practice. I've never heard this idea of reflective practice being acknowledged. I've heard about people getting coached to improve their leadership or their performance or their well-being, but not this other idea. So I'm just curious from your perspective as to, this book seems to have a number of audiences, coaches, but then professionals more broadly. Why does this matter for professionals, to put it simply?
Yeah, thank you, Kathleen. Our book, we've called it Effective Reflective Practice because we're adding a number of dimensions to existing reflective practice. And one of the reasons we call it effective is because of its focus on well-being. So one of our principles is that we go into effective reflective practice with compassion. Compassion is a key part of the process, and compassion has two components. One is compassion to self, but also compassion for clients and the people that we work with. But why is it so important? Particularly for lawyers, I think. Lawyers are people who think for a living. That's one of the things they do. So they're already good at the reflecting and the analyzing. And we hope that adding a structure in the way we do means that lawyers and other professionals are able to be quite intentional about the kind of service they want to provide to others. And Kathleen, the other main thing I just wanted to note is, Professor Tony Grant, he was one of my mentors as well. So he supported me with my own reflective practice. And so I think this bringing the systemic lens to this, which is something Professor Grant was talking about, is so important as well. And even, thinking more broadly like that, so that lawyers can provide the kind of service they do, there is a kind of a societal need for lawyers to look after their own well-being. So we think that's a really important part of the model. And you talked about rumination. That's actually dangerous. And so if people are doing it in little, snatched time between things, it's more likely that we end up focusing on what didn't work well, starting to doubt ourselves or be overly critical. That's a reason that this has to be structured so that people can think and engage with their practice in a way that's good for them and for the people that they serve. So I think those are some of the key reasons that, structured reflective practice is important for professionals. David, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I'm just, I think it might have been before we started, but we were sort of alluding to the idea that it's not something that's common or frequently around in most organizations. I mean, certainly in the consultancy work I did, I worked with lots of public sector organizations in the UK, and it wasn't a feature of what people did. With big generalization, but generally wasn't a feature of what people did. And I think there's a huge systemic and kind of cultural aspect to this that kind of deadens the possibility of it happening for people, because it feels like a luxury. It feels like, you're away thinking in your ivory tower somewhere about something, and it's not very practical. And of course, as we've said several times, lawyers and other professionals are really busy people. And so it can be difficult for them individually to find the time, but also the system doesn't say, make the time. And one of the things we know from our own reflective, and I certainly know from my reflective practice, which I do a lot, obviously, it makes a massive difference to not just your ability to do something well, but to your well-being, to your ability to show up and be present in the right kind of way with the people that you're working with, colleagues or clients. And it lifts you. It's a positive, uplifting thing to do it. And as Christian has just mentioned, it's not just about focusing on the things that didn't work, which is often where we will go to, as he said. We should be reflecting very intentionally about things that have gone really well.
Mhm.
Then we'll find out why they worked, and we'll be able to replicate that in other situations. And that's very motivating and uplifting.
Yeah, and that's the warm and fuzzy thing, Kathleen and Carla, that both David and I are drawn to, is people are going to be feeling better. People are going to feel more fulfilled. They're going to experience more meaningful work. And I want to put alongside that, if somebody's going to call themselves a professional, I'm going to be really challenging here. I think professionals have a responsibility to continually enhance their practice, right? So that's, for me, part of the definition of being a professional, is that you're always engaged in, professional development. And for us, effective reflective practice is a really personalized and clearly structured way of doing that. And just a little anecdote, if I may. I used to do quite a lot of work in the Middle East with senior leaders in organizations. And one question I would ask is, how often during the week do you set aside, a couple of hours just to reflect on how well you're doing? And, people burst out laughing. They're like, we haven't got time to be doing that. We're busy professionals. We're out there all the time. And that's one of the reasons I think executive coaching has become very popular, because that is kind of earmarked time. So if a leader has in their diary executive coaching, well, that's time earmarked, I would argue, for reflective practice. Effective reflective practice is another way of doing that can be done by oneself, with others, or in group settings. So it's another mechanism for ensuring that there's time and space for reflective practice.
Yes, that's just reminded me, I worked in an organization where the chief exec on a Monday morning from 9 till 10 would lock his office door. He had a glass door, you could see him, and he'd just sit at his desk, apparently doing nothing. And he found that such a powerful way of getting into the week, then marshalling, what he had to do and thinking about the priorities. But he was, you get short shift if he went up and knocked on his door between 9 and 10 on a Monday morning, because that was the time. I don't know whether he'd call it reflective practice, but that's what he was doing. And it worked. It really worked for him.
It's so transformative, right? I always say when in my coaching that coaching is a self-reflective practice, like you're doing with someone. And I always say, well, one thing that if I can leave you with is that you continue your coaching time and don't need to be there. As you can be your own coach. Can you keep this going? I always invite my clients to keep the coaching time there, the appointment there, but they can coach themselves.
Wonderful.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, what is coaching other than reflective practice in a structured, supported?
And a lot of the times is what you mentioned, Dave, it's creating space for that to exist in your life.
Mm-hmm.
And it is like, I mean, I know that I have started doing probably, a couple of years ago, and it's transformative. You actually can solve all your problems. Like you sit down and you come up with something to try. Like that is
experimentation, right? That cycle.
Absolutely. And maybe we'd like to discuss this, the cycle part, right? Like you described that in your book, that effective, reflective practice is a cycle. And it has many stages, like so we're setting the intention, having goals, experimenting, reviewing, and then adapting again. So I was just wondering, like, how realistic can we? Well, maybe if you could give like some practical ways to actually use that cycle for professionals.
David, do you want to talk
Yeah.
about?
Yeah, I mean, the kind of image that we put up here from the book is which Christian put together really well. we struggled a long time to get to this kind of image because we wanted something that suggested the fluidity and fluidity of the process that we wanted to describe, and that we didn't want to see it as a kind of linear thing. It's the step 1, step 2, step 3. It does have an order to it, but as you can see from the diagram, they kind of interlink as the process goes on. So we talk about a cycle of effective reflective practice being something. The cycle is a focus on a particular thing that you want to explore. And we see that as this cycle going round. And the starting point for that, and it as you can see from the purple arrow, it's all the way through. But the starting point for this is to have a positive intention about what you want to be doing. So that you establish from the very beginning, before you even think about outcomes or goals or where you're headed, you've got some clear sense of where you might want to go with this process. I mean, just thinking about lawyers, one thing that's obviously really important, I realize this from the advice work that I used to do, that listening to people. I think when I was an advice worker many, many years ago, it kind of started me honing my listening skills, which have now led on into me being a coach and a supervisor. But if we take a lawyer, for instance, thinking about listening, they might decide that their positive intention is to listen more accurately in order to better understand their client's situation and obviously then respond to that. So that's their positive intention, to listen more accurately in order to better understand client's situation. That then leads on to thinking about, well, what's the outcome that I want to achieve? And here we're very, very focused on what's the outcome for others? What's the outcome for clients? What's the outcome here for the lawyer's clients? And that might be crafted along the lines of clients will feel more confident in me as a professional lawyer, and that's really helpful because they'll probably open up a bit more. And for me as the lawyer, it might an outcome could be that I craft better legal responses to the client's situation and take that forward effectively. So then we move into the next stage of this cycle, which is planning. And the lawyer, with that positive intention, with that outcome about listening more attentively, they might decide that part of the plan is to research into listening a bit more and read some books about that. And they might think, if they're clearer about their intention when they're listening to people, clearer with clients about why they're listening, what they're listening for, then that might strengthen the relationship with the client and strengthen the level of connection. So then as part of the plan, we encourage people to come up with hypotheses about what they could do that would make a difference, because we're about making a change here. And that leads to what kind of experiment we put in place. So for this lawyer, it might be, their hypothesis might be, if they're clearer about why they're listening to somebody and they express that to clients, people will open up more and feel a stronger connection to them and give them more kind of complex detail about the situation that they're involved in. So we then go on into experimenting and testing that hypothesis, and the lawyer then will try that out, see how it works. And the experimentation phase moves into review and thinking about how that's worked. And if it's worked well, the lawyer might decide that having been clearer has kind of helped set the scene with the client, being clearer about their intentions for listening, why they're listening, gives the possibility of more detailed conversations. That's been their experience, perhaps. And then through that, in the center of this process, which again obviously goes on all the time, there are learning and insights to be drawn from that review. And the lawyer might decide that their openness, as they've seen that as a strength, and that they can use this more productively when they work with clients to build stronger relationships and therefore work more effectively.
Thanks, David. That's great. A really good overview of the model. And, there's a lot of positive psychology theories that underpin this model as well. And one of the ideas is for professionals to feel more aligned is good for their well-being. So really remembering, well, what is the positive intention for all this effort I'm putting in? That's helpful for professionals because then we feel more aligned to that work. The other thing is this idea of connecting with meaning and purpose or motivation, intrinsic motivation. These things are also good for well-being. So the model is designed in a way that it does focus on outcomes for others, because we talked already about rumination or what some people would call navel gazing. It's possible for us to spend a lot of time reflecting on how would I like to be, what do I want to do, but without making sure that we're thinking about, so what's going to be different for the people that we serve, our colleagues, even our family and friends, then it's not effective reflective practice, because effective reflective practice should lead to change. That's really one of the measures. Is it working? Yeah, there's some positive change occurring as a result of all the time I'm spending thinking about my professional role. And my argument is we're all thinking a lot about our professional roles, but I would say more focused, ring-fence time for this reflective practice increases the chances of us making desired behavior change that's good for us and for others.
Absolutely.
I can see that being of such central, deep relevance. And I just wanted to highlight an additional thing that I think is unique about lawyers that could make this even more useful too, is the fact that, you've spoken about well-being so powerfully there. There's a lot of research around the well-being of lawyers that looks at one of the key blockers. And some of those blockers are around the fact that lawyers are one of the only professions, perhaps the only one, but maybe let's just say one of the only, that are actually trained for our pessimism. And you want your lawyers to be, when they're analyzing legal risk, bringing a particular mindset. If your lawyer was, Pollyanna-ish, you might not get very good legal advice. So you probably wouldn't engage that lawyer. And the other thing about lawyers is we're often trained for our perfectionism, and that is rewarded. There's a lot of commentary in the sector around from the very early stages of our professional practice, those kind of practices. And you can see how that could come about with obsession and the art of getting the perfect language or argument to describe something, the perfect advice, the brief. There's a lot of competition that goes along with that. So I think here that risk of rumination is so strong because of those pressures. So just like my reflection of thinking about my experience as a lawyer is I think that having that structure, so because it is highly structured, at the same time it's not complicated in the sense that you can easily go through each stage.
Yeah, and Kathleen, I have a suggestion here, because this is the whole idea. The reason we hand drew the model is really to convey it's flexible. Here, this is a proposed way of doing it. People can use it flexibly. But in this scenario, because of the perfectionism or the tendency towards pessimism being rewarded, my recommendation is that lawyers might work with one another. So the model works really well in partnership as well. So David and I, for example, could work together on my reflective practice, where I would explain to David, look, this is my positive intention. He'd ask me some questions. And the reason for that is that we're often more caring and compassionate to people we care about than we are with ourselves. So if, let's say two lawyers are working together and the one lawyer is providing just that support, just listening, highlighting positives, highlighting what successes are there. My kind of message is, if we could each talk to ourselves the way that we would talk to a valued colleague or a friend, that can be transformative. And people have often asked me, well, I don't know what is self-compassion? How can I be compassionate to myself? I think it's possible to train compassion when we look at others. So we train ourselves to be compassionate when working with colleagues, friends. And then once we've developed that skill, we turn it inward. So our question could always be, how would I talk to my friend about a similar situation or a similar developmental need? And finally, I just want to highlight that, as I've said before, lawyers are trained thinkers. They're just so fantastic at figuring things out, putting together arguments. So they've got some excellent skills they're bringing to reflective practice. They're trained thinkers. So I think it could be transformational.
So with that in mind, you can just imagine, I'm thinking about my day today. I do lawyering part-time and coaching and study the rest of the time. And today was one of my lawyering days. And suddenly there was an advice that was relatively urgent that I was rushed to kind of get done. And I was stressed a little bit because I'm like, oh, goodness me, I've got this interview. I need to get this draft done. In fact, I had a conversation to allow myself flexibility with that. But it's just one of those days where you get caught up. And I can just see that lawyers might object a little bit and kind of say, I'm busy. I'm too busy. Like, how can I integrate this into it? Or maybe let me even say, how can I begin to even experiment with integrating this into my practice? What might you say to such a lawyer?
Yeah. Well, I'd love to chat with those lawyers, and I know they can come to the Thriving Lawyer for one thing, for some coaching, which would be incredibly helpful, I think. And the reason I say this is I'm caring about the lawyer, so even if they're resisting and saying, well, I haven't got time, Christian, in your fantasy world, this is great, but this is what my day looks like. I'd still want to talk to them and kind of connect with them. And, I travel a lot for my work. And so sometimes I don't have the luxury to sit down in a room for 2 hours with a piece of paper and a pen. But sometimes I'm sitting in an airport lounge. And I can break this down into stages. In an airport lounge, I'm thinking, what is my positive intention? All it takes is an iPad or a little notepad. I'm just kind of jotting down what's one thing that I think if I were to improve this one thing, it would make a real difference to my client. So I would just jot that down. And then, on the flight, maybe I've got a pen and paper and I'm just thinking, okay, well, what if I'm able to do that one thing? What's different? So one idea is to break this down into small steps. And the other is to use it when we're having other types of professional conversations as well. So this model also can work in a group setting. So imagine there's a group of lawyers just wanting to reflect on, look, we want to be better, even better than we are. So what sort of things can we do? I can imagine a facilitated group conversation. It could take 45 minutes where we could just go through that cycle once. And what David said earlier, once we get this cycle kind of happening more naturally, it does become second nature. And some of the most experienced reflective practitioners we talked to, they were doing this all the time. So one of the people, an international speaker, was saying that when they're giving their presentation, they would already be doing a little bit of, okay, that's something I need to be thinking about next time. So it can really become integrated in how we work all the time. We can do it on the train home. We can just be starting to jot things down. So I would argue that making some time for this will have a positive impact on the rest of your professional life.
Yeah, it's a kind of investment. And I think it's don't think about it as too big an ask. as Christian said, you can break it down. But I mean, I would suggest that people just take half an hour a week, 20 minutes a week, and sit down with something. It doesn't have to be a massive topic. It can be. You can use this framework to look at something that's really quite big and complex. On the other hand, you can take a very, very simple, straightforward thing, something about your day that's coming up, and use this process, 15, 20 minutes. And as Christian's illustrated, using it with somebody else, either one-to-one or in a group, that needs a bit more time, obviously, but chatting to a colleague and using this process together, knocking some ideas about. And even if you don't finish the process, something will happen. There'll be some learning that will happen. And once you realize that can happen, you'll start to think, well, perhaps I should do this some more.
Thank you for so beautifully addressing that lawyer's objections. Yeah, it is very practical. I think that's a good place to move to the next sort of theme that we wanted to explore. What I was really enjoyed coming to the chapter in the book that was about organizations, because so far we've talked about the individual lawyer and how they can integrate that, but of course the ability and space to do that can be really impacted by culture, of course, of the organization. So curious to get your thoughts on how, I'm thinking of legal practices of all kinds, whether they're law firms or in-house, whatever they look like, barristers even. They work a bit more individually, but they're still in chambers. But how can legal employers, teams, organizations perhaps take steps to provide the right environment for people to engage in this sort of reflection?
I think one key thing is about leadership. And senior leaders, those organizations, realizing that reflective practice is a vital aspect of professional development, and saying that loud and clear, and creating opportunities for people to do it, and for people to see them doing it. I mean, a bit like my chief exec example, that it was quite obvious what he was doing, and he talked about what he was doing and in meetings. So I think there's a starting point with the senior people to get on board with the idea that this is really vital and important, and to begin to create the conditions for it to happen.
Yeah,
And give people permission to take a little bit of time out on occasion.
yeah. Can I give a real example from one of my leaders who's recently retired, Professor Kieran O'Boyle? He directed the center that I worked in, the Center for Positive Health Sciences. And, one time when he was taking annual leave for a week, he said to the team, he said, look, I'm going to be on annual leave for a week, and I'm not taking my laptop. And, that little indication, that was so liberating for the rest of us. It was a very clear message that when you're on annual leave, you can take time off. So there's lots of small things that leaders and anybody in an organization can do by role modeling some of these well-being behaviors. And I'm sure that any organization or entity that could be explicit to say, look, we're interested in you performing at your best, and we're interested in your well-being. If we can convey that message, it comes back to the name of your organization, the Thriving Lawyer. We all want that. We all want lawyers who are thriving or flourishing. And so then thinking about, is the environment we're in conducive to that? And there'll be policies, there'll be ways of interacting that support this idea that everyone's well-being is important, and there'll be some that are getting in the way of that. So identifying those, making small changes. One thing I've seen in an organization is, just cutting down the Zoom meeting lengths to 45 minutes or 50 minutes. That was an intentional change. And the organization said, from now on, let's make sure all meetings are scheduled for 50 minutes. But they explain the intention as well. The intention is so that you're not kind of back-to-back meetings. You have 10 minutes when you can pop out for a drink or something. So those signs, places where people can meet to say, hey, that place, times that are allocated for reflective practice. I think there's many small things that don't, require huge changes in structure or huge investments that will start to show that in this place, we care about your professional performance and we have an interest in your well-being. And I'm not, again, this isn't a soft and fuzzy thing. We do have an interest in the well-being of our people, because if they're burnt out, if they're on sick leave, if we have to go out and recruit somebody else, that's got a huge cost to it beyond the personal cost. So I think there's many arguments for organizations to really embrace this idea of reflective practice. And I'm really pushing it here, I know, but it's like a double win. If an organization is saying, we're going to create time for reflective practice, you're actually creating time for professional development and growth that's actually going to be good for the well-being of your team members.
I'm going to push it even further, because I think that organizations will often say the right things and write the right things in policies and missions and value statements, all the rest of it. It's got to be followed through. It's got to be the lived experience of the people in the organization that this is really what is happening. And I think, you mentioned culture, Kathleen. One of the things that's a real killer of reflective practice is fear of judgment. And from what you've been saying, I suspect that in the lawyering world, there's a bigger sense of that possibly than in other places, because of the competition and the kind of individual aspect of it being perhaps more prioritized. So I think, culturally, organizations need to shift, and they need to really make the shift, not just say stuff. You need to go on and do it.
Can I just jump in with another real example? I won't name the organization or the country because this isn't a great example, but there was an organization that said, hey, Christian, we'd like you to come do some work around positive psychology because, we're an organization that values the well-being of our people, and that's kind of, top priority for us. Like David said, it was in all the, the mission statements and those documents. Then I went to this organization. I pop in to see the person at reception. And, I was there to meet somebody, but I went to the person at reception. I said, hey, what's it like to work here? And they're like, oh, my goodness, this reception area had big electric doors that kind of just opened like this. And it meant that the person where they were sitting, they were cold all the time because the door kept opening, they're freezing. And they said, have a look at this. There's a tiny little electric heater with one, little light across under their desk. And they were like, I'm freezing all the time here. And it was so interesting because this was an organization that said, we're all about the well-being of our people. And the first person I bump into, is saying, well, nobody's really paying attention to my kind of basic need to stay warm. So I really love I've often been asked, how do we know we're doing well when it comes to the well-being of our people? My answer is always just ask them. Hey, how are we doing? Even asking people, how's your well-being? If you're prepared to follow up, like David says, just asking them is already going to have a positive impact. But asking people and then not doing anything actually has the opposite outcome, which is why I'm not a big fan of these surveys. There's many organizations that have done quick well-being surveys. There's no point asking your people about their well-being if you're not going to do something about it. But if you can match the two things, ask them and do something. And for me, it's the tiniest things. It's the smallest little changes can really indicate an interest. One organization I worked with, they were cutting costs. So they said, we're thinking of cutting there's free coffee on the third floor or something. We're going to cut that. I said, that's the last thing you need to cut. So the small things that show that the employer cares about its team, and the employer does, the employer should. So I think that's my little rant. Anyway, thanks, David, for kicking it off. You got me started.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I really hope that reflective practice is one day in the corporations, the organization, like coaching is today. Like nobody doubts that as active coach, creates a positive impact on the employees.
Yeah.
That's like, and I hope reflective practice get there one day. And I'm sure you two are, thank you for the work that you are doing, bringing the science and then just going around as well saying like, well, look, this is effective. This is really good. It can really increase your well-being, and you can, you'll be more profitable in the end of as well because retention and all the things. So I just love to tap into like coaching, like how would we, like you're both leading figures in the coaching world. So how do you think that reflective practice and coaching together might be combined, to enhance even more the like, because what I'm coming from, like when we think about coaching, there is that unique ability to both support and challenge individuals, right? Like to help them to sort of stretch beyond the comfort zones and get deeper insights, and in many cases create like lasting changes. So how do you see them both supporting each other or maybe complementing each other?
Well, I think we said earlier that coaching is really a form of facilitated reflective practice. That's what we're encouraging our coaching clients to do when we're working with them. So I think in that respect, coaches are facilitators of that process. And I think, and I don't want this to sound like we're suggesting this is a coaching model. We're far from that. But I think there are elements of the process and elements of the principles and purposes that sit behind it that Christian was talking about earlier that are very, very valuable in coaching. If, for instance, we were coaching someone, we got them to think about their positive intention for why they were thinking about what they were thinking about and doing what they're doing, then I think that would add to the coaching process. That would really help people to think about their starting point. Why am I doing this? And that leads to a connection to people's values and emotions as well, values and beliefs. Because it gives a possibility for those to start to emerge, which may and probably are very important in the process of the coaching and the topic that they're focusing on. So I think, and I mean, I want to stress again that we're not suggesting, because I know coaches, in our experience, coaches can kind of leap on, is a new tool. I don't like that word because it's too mechanistic. That there's a terrible danger that people leap to that. I'm not suggesting that that's what it becomes. I'm suggesting that there are parts of it that can be used as a process that would help to structure a coaching conversation.
And Carla, they're also very complementary. Organizations that embrace reflective practice will obviously see the value of coaching, and organizations that have already embraced coaching already see the value of reflective practice. And there's also ways the two can connect. If I'm going through a reflective practice process, maybe when I get to the plan stage, I think, well, I want to work with a coach on this. The coach is going to help me plan. And I've already done a lot of thinking. I know what my intention is. I know what the outcome is. So I might work with a coach around, well, how can I plan something? So I think they're very complementary, and both interventions can be used to bring more balance to people's professional lives. That's the thing I'm most passionate about now, Carla, is not assuming that coaching is always about the next thing and adding something and doing something new. I think sometimes coaching should be just about finding greater balance in our lives, making sure that we're more aligned, making sure that we're taking into account our own well-being as well as the well-being of those around us. So I think they're both really powerful tools that again, for the listeners here, who might be a bit skeptical about this, I would say that both coaching and reflective practice are actually designed. Their design is to support others to, to flourish. So these are positively intentioned interventions. And so even if you're a little bit doubtful or skeptical, I would say just give it a try. Either have a coaching conversation, see how that goes, or engage in a cycle of reflective practice. And if it's not working for you, I would say don't do it. I don't want to waste your time either, but I do think, please give it a try, because my hope is that it could be transformational. It could be that one conversation that really helps to change a way of thinking and engaging with our professional worlds.
So beautifully summed up there. That's a really good spot for perhaps to wind up with our just one final thing that we'll put out there, which is simply, is there anything else, whether it's advice or some final remarks that you'd like to, leave our listeners with?
Yeah, I mean, my final remark is just to appreciate the listeners. So thank you for, I'm already happy that you're listening to this. That's already part of the process, and I'm really hopeful that these kinds of ways of working will be beneficial to you and those around you.
Thank you.
Yeah. For those reasons, I'd just like to underline again, give it a go. Give it a try. What's to be lost? What's to be lost? Plenty to be gained.
Well, thank you. Thank you both. We've really appreciated it.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting us.
Thank
Been
you.
really good.